Unpermitted construction. And I have to tell you, it was one of the biggest classes that we've ever had in our market center. It was a standing room only. Obviously, the subject is really hot and people are really into learning more about it because we're all dealing with it. Unpermitted construction. So tell us, explain this and some of the major issues that arise with this type of construction.
Well, of course, anytime you do something in a building that affects the mechanical, electrical, or structural members or systems of the building, you're required to get a building permit.
Yeah.
Now, is that done all the time? Of course not. People convert garages, people add bathrooms or bedrooms, and or convert porches, things like that, into living space.
Yeah.
This is done all the time without building permits. Even people, for example, will remodel a bathroom or let's say a kitchen, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, well it was done by a contractor, it was done to code, but he didn't get a permit."
Yeah.
Well, excuse me. There's in order to code, you've got to get a permit.
Interesting. Yeah.
So the issues that we find is that the biggest problem is when something is being built with a permit, that means it's being inspected as it's being constructed.
Yeah.
So there are phases of inspections that allows the inspector to see how things are wired in the walls, how things are plumbed, how things are constructed, so that when they close the walls up and hide everything, they know it was done properly.
They know it was done properly.
Because once you've hidden it behind drywall and behind cabinets or whatever, you can't see exactly what happened.
So you have to call the inspector in while it's open, have them come in and say, "Yep, this is all done. This is all done properly," and then they sign off on it.
They sign off and say it's okay to close it up, and then you go ahead and close it up.
Got it.
But without that series of inspections, those progress inspections, they call them, you really don't know how the work was done. And even as a homeowner or an investor, for example, even you won't know how things are done if you're done properly. You don't understand construction necessarily, so you need the inspectors to come along and help.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, Toni, that kind of brings me to a question. If you do have unpermitted construction, how is that counted, like in your value when you're trying to sell property or purchase property? How does that play into that?
Well, of course, if something is built without a permit, it is necessarily going to be showing up as part of the square footage of the property. I'm sure many times realtors run across the fact that something has been reported as a certain square footage, and yet it's actually larger. Which means it was added on to, and it doesn't come up in the tax rolls and that kind of thing because they never got the permit for it.
Sure.
So obviously that becomes a concern, becomes an issue that you're going to have to deal with in escrow, and it just can slow things down and complicate. Certainly does complicate the matter.
Right.
Can an appraiser come in and validate that additional square footage and make it real, if you would, or count?
Well, the appraiser is there only to tell you what the value of the property is based on comparables.
Gotcha.
They can't tell you whether or not this property was done to code or not to code. They're not code inspectors either.
But when they measure it, say you add on something and you didn't get a permit per se, but you added on some space, and then the appraiser comes along with the new buyer and they measure that space. Do they count that space?
Most likely not. I'm not saying they wouldn't ever, but most likely they wouldn't, because if there's no permit for it and there's no record of it, then it really couldn't be counted as square footage of the property.
Got it. So, John, it has been amazing having you with us today, and I tell you, we really need to have you come back because there's a ton of